Yeah.
Oh, you're headed for a different climate.
Yeah. 70 degrees and sunny.
Everyone has class, but I have, yeah, it's just not feasible. I don't know. Well. Yeah. You know, my problem is like, so McKenna's working on evals, like that's what she said she wants to get better at. And so like I've been meeting with her about evals. Yeah. They asked McKenna, and I'm like, McKenna has more things to do right now. I have to longer.
Nice. That's okay.
And so I just don't do it.
Oh, no. I saw everyone studying there. It's like I was from
We just got that good training. Like we didn't find anything that's working from that happened.
Yeah.
Because like I started off like and that's when it just slipped like 3 weeks down and
So the idea is, I don't know, it's not. I know someone. And so he got like an hour and gave me like 20 ideas. Yeah. And now I have action. Okay. Alright, so we have the effects of soreness on my cerebral cortex. We have the effects of caffeine on me or the effects of bone or my chocolate reactor. I'm a definitely caffeine dependent. Yeah. So that one would be super interesting. Was the foam rolling one also? It would be yeah, like you could use that in everyday practice. Yeah. So shoot, right? Maybe do the caffeine one, then I'll be like, so yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Like I have a really high pain tolerance. Is it because that's just me, or is it because I consume solid 300 milligrams of caffeine on the daily? I was like, yeah, that's fair. But I don't know. But you never know. Like, shoot. What about like? Oh gosh, you can't because we can't do long term stuff. But like, I was thinking, yeah, like chronic versus. I can feel the knot. I'm just gonna do some That's like I'm gonna be there. I texted Tori, but she's not responding. Oh no. This is fine. I'll remind you. Oh. Yeah, maybe just like roll the dice. Yeah. They all look super interesting.
Tuesday was already full, so yeah.
Start just a minute.
Put in my suitcase, that's about it. I'm gonna take my notebook home today, land out, but I had all my notebooks except my yellow one, so I just had those this morning.
Just a little bit.
I think fall asleep yet.
everybody? Good, good. So, as you can see for today, we'll talk about components of a research proposal as well as cover chapter 2 on developing the problem using the literature. So, I do want a rough idea of what your proposal topic is, so I'm just going to pass this around, and you can just print your name and then print what your working title is next to it. So I'll just start that around. You get 10 points, so it's just, you can write down whatever. If you've got multiple ideas, then just write down the one that is you're kind of leaning towards. Just want to see that you're thinking about it. For Thursday, remember over in the library. So that's, you can see that building right there. And so you want to go to room 311. And we'll have Tyree Jinks, who's outstanding, been here several years. She'll talk about how to find research articles. So it'd be good. Usually when she asks, nobody ever raises their hand. So if you want some help tracking down some references, maybe let her use your topic as an example. She could take you through and show you all the resources the library has for that. And that's all we'll be doing on Thursday. So bring something, I would bring something to take a few notes, and she's a great reference librarian. So any questions? Okay, all right, so I thought the best thing to show you all the things that are in this week's folder. Okay, so there's lots of helpful materials. A thesis proposal, which is a more extensive version of the proposal that you'll be writing for this class. So what I'm hoping is the proposal that you write for this class, you can add to it to use for your thesis in the future. So what you're doing is kind of a rough draft as part of this class, and then you polish it up, make sometimes a lot of revisions to bring it up to speed for a thesis later on. There's a great example of a literature review from the American College of Sports Medicine in 2009. So the reason I put that there was just to show you what a good lit review looks like in terms of headings and subheadings and references. There is an article here. Some of you have a different class from me that we talked about this. The reason I post it in this class is because of the table. So sometimes when you do a lit review, it's good to have a table to kind of organize studies. And so it's a good quick reference to see the studies and kind of the direction of the results. And so there's some good tables in this brief literature review. And then the 2 PowerPoints. So components of a research proposal. And so we'll be talking about each component that you'll have. So if you go to the course outline, maybe I've closed it already, but go to the course outline. And so as part of your proposal, you have all of these little things, and then the methods. So today we're going to talk about what each of these things is, and you can be thinking about how you would write it for your own proposal. So what you'll notice is that everything you see here is exactly how the proposal is formatted. So you can look at the proposal. This is an example from 5 years ago. And you can see how the title page looks. You can see the table of contents. So everything that you're going to be doing is here in this proposal. The abstract, what that looks like. And then with the introduction, all the different sections. So the background, problem statement, significance, purpose, questions, hypotheses, definitions, assumptions, limitations, delimitations, and then the lit review. So exactly what you'll be doing for your proposal. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it. Components of a research proposal. So beyond the title page and table of contents, you'll have the abstract. And so in a completed research study, the abstract will go all the way through the results and conclusion. So for your proposal, which is due just before spring break, you'll be going all the way through to the methods, through just the methods, because you won't have collected any data yet at that point. So, as you'll see with this thesis proposal, get it here. You can see just the proposal phase, just going through the methods. So the purpose of this particular study was to compare the VO2 from a Bruce protocol versus the VO2 from a polar watch. So the estimated VO2 from a polar watch and to correlate the two. So ideally, if the Bruce protocol says your VO2 is 50 milliliters per kilogram per minute, then this new polar watch should also come up with a similar value for their test. And so that was the purpose, is to simply correlate the two to see how close they are. So the Bruce protocol would be the criterion measure to which you're comparing all of these other more convenient estimated measures. So the polar watch, the advantage is convenience, whereas the Bruce protocol takes a lot of special equipment, oxygen analyzers, and so on. So that's the abstract. Okay, so introduction components. So right in the course outline, as you look under the introduction, we're going to go right down the line with each of these components. So background. This is where you provide a small literature review. So not extensive, like later in your paper where the literature review is a little more involved. This is where you're just including the most key studies. So just a summary. So can you give justification for your topic? So just including the most essential components. What's the historical framework? Keep your writing simple and straightforward. Almost like you're writing the proposal to be read by someone that's not in the field, so they would understand what you're talking about. Okay, so next is problem statement. So 1 or 2 sentences, the problem or question that the study will be designed to address. So let's take a look at the problem statement for this proposal. So in this particular case, it was longer than, looks like more than 2 sentences, but that's okay. So it has been significantly demonstrated numerous times that aerobic cardiovascular fitness results in short-term and long-term benefits both psychologically and physiologically. However, these tests are time-consuming, require a professional to administer, and are not suitable for all individuals to perform on their own. Therefore, an accurate and reliable device would be highly beneficial to accurately and efficiently measure aerobic fitness for any individual at any time, such as the fitness test on the Polar A300 fitness watch. So, can you see the justification there? So stating that time-consuming, expensive, professional training to administer the Bruce protocol, but here you have this watch that any consumer can wear, and they can do this test to get an estimate that comes close to what you would get with a Bruce protocol. So that would be a good way to state your problem. Okay, so moving on down the list, significance of the study. This is not statistical significance. This is significance in terms of importance. So what's the value of your study? So for Danny, she's thinking of a jump intervention, and so the value might be a reduction in injury risk with her study, so something to talk about. Sydney, the same, would be along those lines of injury prevention. So contribution to new knowledge and how others will benefit from it. Purpose statement. So this is the reason for your study, the purpose. What is the intent, and what do you expect to accomplish from your study? So a declarative, I like that word, declarative statement, summarizes the study's main goal. So the purpose of this study is to, and you go from there. Again, examples all the way through the proposal. I suggest you look at those. So research question. The process of stating the problem that the research is designed to address. So there's a lot of relation between these different components. I think it's important that we go through all of these because the more you can think about something from different angles, the better grasp you have on it. So you take ownership of your study. This is what we're trying to address. These are the outcomes that might happen as a result. Null hypothesis. We talked a little bit about this last week. Null hypothesis. So this would mean that the outcome is no differences between conditions or groups. So any differences are due to random chance. So in reality, there are no true differences between groups or conditions. So the alternative hypothesis is exactly the opposite. So there are true differences between conditions or groups. So you want to state both of those in your proposal. Okay, operational definitions. This is really helpful for the reader. So how, in the proposal, let's go back for this one. Operational definitions. So we're getting down to so you would choose what you need to classify as something to include in this section. So healthy college-age individuals. How do you define that? Well, this author chose to define it as young adults who do not have cardiovascular disease or any health conditions that might inhibit accurate and optimal physical performance for reliable results on these tests. Statistically significant results. Okay, the operational definition. This author is using the P less than 0.05 to define significance. Failure on the Bruce test refers to the individual running as long and as hard as they can until they cannot run any further. Some of you have done that Bruce test. And then they have to grasp the side rails to hop off and set both feet at the sides of the treadmill safely. So as I look over, I know a lot of you have done that test and know what that's like. So this author is defining that. Okay. All right, so assumptions, statements by the researcher that certain elements of the research are understood to be true. We'll go back in just a moment and look at that. Limitations, aspects over which the researcher has limited control, so it could be confounding variables. So in some studies, a confounding variable could be nutritional intake. So things of that nature that could affect the outcome of the study, but are not actually being controlled. So in a lot of studies that assess strength or other muscle fitness variables, nutritional intake is not controlled, but does what you eat affect how your body responds to weight training? Sure it does. Okay, so that would be a limitation. Delimitations, choices made by the researcher which should be mentioned. So these are boundaries. This has to do with how well you can apply the results. So, Danny's the only one I've really heard about other than Sydney they're doing. So her results would apply to college age basketball athletes. So she would want to state that as a delimitation. So we're not generalizing her results to the whole population, just this particular segment. Okay, so before I go forward, I want to go back because I think examples are important to help. So let's take a look. Assumptions, limitations, delimitations. So in this particular proposal, assumptions. So with a VO2 test, the maximal amount of oxygen uptake, it is assumed that all participants are going as hard and as far as possible during the Bruce test. So that's important. You're assuming that they're pushing themselves to the limit. Because if they're not, then that changes things. You're not getting a maximal measure of oxygen uptake. It is also assumed that all participants follow the guidelines for pre-testing sessions, such as not exercising or consuming caffeine prior to the testing session. So could that influence results if some of your participants had like 200 milligrams of caffeine just before and everyone else didn't? Yeah, sure. The health condition of the participant is reliant on their word. It's assumed they're healthy without cardiovascular disease and so on. Okay, so does everyone understand what assumptions are? So start thinking about this in the context of your topic. Limitations. A limitation for the study includes a small, non-randomized sample of 20 healthy college individuals. Okay, so that's a limitation. So we can't apply it to everybody. We just apply it to the population that was utilized. Additional limitations involve participants not going as hard or as far as possible on the Bruce test, as well as not being able to accurately monitor their physical activity and caffeine intake prior to a testing session. So tying back into the assumptions. Delimitations. Major delimitation of this experiment includes lack of randomized test subjects in the population. This was done due to the small amount of individuals attending MSUB to recruit are willing to volunteer to participate in this study. So pretty straightforward there. Okay, so how many of you are comfortable with things that need to be included in your introduction? You know, I'll bet if I asked you to come up with an introduction by Thursday, and I'm not going to do that, I'll bet you it would probably take you 60 minutes and you could probably come up with an introduction. You know a few studies that relate to your topic. You start thinking about it, you can come up with all of this stuff in very little time. So it's not that bad. You're going to zip right through it once you begin. Okay, so literature review. So this is more extensive. So the introduction, you're just giving a little bit of background information. The lit review is more detailed. So you're examining many different aspects of your topic. So for Sydney, muscle activity in all the muscles that control the ankle joint. You might also examine different populations in how they respond. Populations that have undergone an injury versus those who are healthy and differences in responses. So an outline is really valuable. So you can really organize all your studies. You go to the library and you get Tyree to help you, and you have all of these studies collected. And so if you have an outline, you can put studies under each heading. So you put certain studies under this heading, and that way you know exactly what to talk about. So you're not just sitting down and you're overwhelmed trying to type your lit review. You kind of have a direction to it. So for this topic, I'm going to include these studies and so on. A method, study population. So we just state who. Who is it that you're going to be including and why? What is their health status? So in your final paper, you would probably want to include things like height and age, maybe like training status, experience. So looking at experienced runners is a lot different than novice runners. They're more efficient. So you want to talk about that. Sampling method. So most of the projects in this department, it's a sample of convenience. And that's great, because the research is all about the experience. So you say participants were recruited from a sample of college students in the Health and Human Performance Department at Montana State University, Billings. And so I'm going to give you the opportunity after spring break to go into our KIN 105 class. How many of you remember being in the 105 class and having people come in and ask, will you be in my study? That's what you're going to be now. So the role is reversed. So this is where you're going to be the researcher. Okay, equipment. So what equipment do you need? And you list everything. Stopwatch. Okay, everything you can think of, you'll list, no matter what it is. Okay, procedures. So this is, we'll talk. How are you going to collect the data? How are you going to, are you controlling for certain things? What type of environment? Do people perform better with an audience? Most of the time, yeah. Jordan, if you know you have a whole weight room yelling for you, you're going to perform better? You're going to try, I'll bet. Yeah. Or if you're just in an isolated locked room with a researcher and it's quiet, it's a real difference. The audience effect is tremendous in motivating people to perform. If you're going to have verbal encouragement, that's fine, but you need to state that. Were participants given verbal encouragement? And were participants given consistent verbal encouragement? So you have to cheer for everybody. cheer for the first person, you have to cheer the same for the second person. That's, you don't think about it, but that's research. Okay, research design. What is the strategy? How are you going to accomplish your project? So usually studies fall under one of four categories that you'll state. So descriptive, which is what Danny is doing. Correlational, so putting two variables together. So the proposal, the sample proposal is a correlational study between the Bruce protocol and the Polar Watch. Causal comparative, quasi-experimental. That one is where most applied studies fall. It's not necessarily tightly controlled in a laboratory setting. It's more in a practical setting. But there's a treatment group and an experimental group. Applied studies are nice because you can take the information and use it. And experimental. So this would be very randomized controlled trials. Tight control, which most of the basic type research falls there. So for this class and for your thesis, you're probably looking at one of the first three is where it'll be. Okay, so stats. That's where we do some class activities to help there. So this is where you'll have your laptop with Microsoft Excel, and I'll give you a file and I'll talk about how to do a Pearson R, how to run a t-test, a dependent t-test, an independent t-test, one-way ANOVA. We go through repeated ANOVA, and that's where we stop. And all of those things should allow you to do your thesis. Okay, so questions. So I encourage you, look through that sample as you're writing, and let's take a look just to confirm here. So you have, we went through all of this. Have your lit review, which is really not an extensive lit review, pages 6 through 9. So you have your page guidelines there. Pages 10 and 11, this will be your methods, and then your references after that. You will do a little bit of data collection, so more or less like a pilot study. This is where you'll go ask for participants. So as an observational study, mean and standard deviation values will be reported for all study variables. Participants can be recruited on a voluntary basis from other HAP classes or your acquaintances. IRB approval is not necessary. Okay, so this is a class project. Ultimately, IRB approval will be required, so that's why Janae Cross was here last week. However, an informed consent that you design will be required for practice. So you'll still do an informed consent for practice, not because you need to for this project, but because of practice. Ideally, this pilot study should serve as a springboard into your thesis. So the results of your pilot study won't be reported in your proposal, but they will be reported as part of your research presentation. So this would be, you'll be up here where I'm at, and you'll be presenting all the way from your introduction through your methods, results, and so you'll talk about what results you got, and maybe the direction you're taking in future research with your thesis. So, that being said, your research proposal is due just before spring break. So I think it's better that way. That way you turn it in and then relax. And then you get back, and that's when you start going to the KIN 105 class and other classes to recruit participants. Make sense? Okay, all right, so let's go to chapter 2. All right, developing the question and using the literature. So it looks like got some good topics here. Caffeine effects on sleep habits. Hey. Interesting. Effective footwear on force production and power during a squat. Shoulder laxity. Got some good ones here. Okay. So you got a good springboard. Okay, I want you to read this quote. Single experiment seldom disproves a theory. Old theories, like old soldiers, gradually fade away when better theories come to take their place. So everything evolves over time. In health and human performance, things have definitely evolved over time. Here's a couple of things that you may have heard. Whether they are true or not, I don't know. I think I've heard both of these at one time or another. So when we see claims like the above, we should ask ourselves why these things occur. What are the explanations? This is where research comes in to test it. Okay. So I want you to read through this with me. In 1930, the first volume of Research Quarterly, now Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport, had a paper by Dr. C.H. McCloy. So all the way back 1930. McCloy provided a list of questions by which a researcher can judge the quality and feasibility of a research problem. Those questions listed here are as valid and useful today as they were in 1930. So what are these questions? So think about these questions in relation to your topic. Is the problem in the realm of research? Okay, can it be tested? Does it interest you? That's what I'm hoping. You'll choose a topic that you really sincerely want to know more about. Does it possess unity? So looking at the literature, are results that have examined the topic consistent, or are they different? Is it worthwhile? Okay, so is it meaningful? Applied research is worthwhile. Is it feasible? So we have a lot of great tools at MSUB to do research with, but we don't have everything. So think about equipment availability. Is it timely? There's a lot of topics out there that are under discussion that maybe you could do a study that would help address something that's currently popular. Can you attack the problem without prejudice? That's important. So what if you're a researcher examining something and you're maybe examining one training method versus another, and personally you really like one training method over the other. So as a researcher, you have to have without bias in your study. So you have to be willing to put aside any prejudice or bias in it and look at the true effects. Are you prepared in the techniques to address the problem? So that's what this class is all about, is helping you prepare. Okay. So where's a good place to start? Pick up a literature review. Look at the references in the literature review. because the references that make up a literature review give you a good idea of what's already been done. Is your topic a poor topic if it's already been done? No. Repetition is really important in research. Sometimes we think, well, that's already been done to death. Well, maybe you could have a different take on it. Maybe you could examine things in a slightly different way. Okay, so identify the question. So everyone's done that pretty much today. So, Megan, caffeine effects on sleep habits. So let's have Megan make a question. So let's be specific. How much caffeine? What do you think? Okay. How much caffeine is in a cup of coffee? Yeah, 80 to 100 milligrams, something like that. Okay, so how much caffeine? So we need to know an amount of caffeine. Let's say, what is the effect of, we'll just say 100 milligrams of caffeine. Sleep habits. We need to define sleep habits. What's a sleep habit?
Amount of hours of sleep.
Yeah, okay, so hours. So that could be a question is the effect of 100 milligrams of caffeine, how many hours prior to sleep? Let's set a number. Okay, so the effect of, what is the effect of 100 milligrams of caffeine 2 hours prior to just going to sleep at night? Okay, could be it, or the amount of hours of sleep. Okay. So are you thinking of examining this over long term, or is it more of a cross-sectional? I hate to put you in the spotlight. Okay. So maybe you have a control condition and an experimental condition you're looking at. What source of caffeine?
I don't know, because it could be different, like coffee or
Yeah.
energy drinks.
What do you think, Hank? What? If you were to volunteer for Megan's study, what would you rather have?
I mean, I would, like, personally, if I was doing this study, because if you have just, like, straight black coffee, then you're, like, looking at just the caffeine, but if you have, like, coffee with cream and sugar, then you're, like, adding different effects.
Okay, so what do we call the cream and the sugar? And from a research perspective, what is that? That's a confounders. Yeah. So those could have different effects. Those could make you sleepy. So things to think about. So write your question, review discipline styles. So that's kind of your approach to addressing the question. Search the literature. So you've got your lit review. Manage your references. So one of the things that Tyree will talk about is trying to narrow down the scope of your search. You'll type in your topic into a search engine and 1,200 sources will come back. So you need to be very specific, taking only the references that are closest to your topic. Manage your references. Okay, so critically analyze and evaluate. So you're just narrowing down your references even more. Then you synthesize, that's where an outline would come in, and then write your lit review. So, give you an example. This is right here. So the American College of Sports Medicine, kind of the flagship organization within HHP. So there's a lot of sub-disciplines in HHP. American College of Sports Medicine is definitely one of the primary ones. So this is their position stand, progression models in resistance training for healthy adults. So they have a summary, or we might consider that an abstract, and then an introduction. And I've posted this on D2L. So you can see the major headings here: progression principles, so specificity. These are subheadings, so notice just major headings are in all caps, and then your subheadings, first letter is capitalized. Classical periodization, reverse periodization, undulating periodization, and then it gets into your trainable characteristics. So a few of you are in my other class. What are the 4 trainable characteristics? Just quizzed you on them yesterday. There's one right there. Strength. Okay, that's one.
Endurance.
Yes, localized endurance. Hypertrophy. What's the other one? Power. Yeah, that's right. So what they do in this review, they're very well organized. Trainable characteristics in all caps, and then they go into the first one. So muscle strength. So looking at muscle strength, they go muscle actions. Kinesiology students, you know all about muscle actions, loading, okay, evidence statement and recommendation after each section, volume, exercise selection, free weights and machines, exercise order, rest periods. Pretty much every single aspect of prescription for that characteristic is covered. So velocity of muscle action, that's how fast you're moving the weight. Frequency, just about everything you can think of. Okay, so after that, they get into the next one, so muscle hypertrophy. And they follow the same approach: muscle hypertrophy, muscle action. They go through the exact same sections, loading and volume. So all the way down, muscle endurance is next. Very long review. Okay, so very end, relevance to sport applications, motor performance, vertical jump, sprint speed, agility. So really a pretty comprehensive review here. So the idea is everything is very well organized. So you'd want to do the same thing as part of your paper. Major headings and subheadings as part of your paper and topic. Okay. So as you're going through a literature review, what aspects were lacking? Where could your project fill a gap? So if there's a gap in the literature, how could your topic address that? So make a summary table. So I included a summary table with this next article right here. So this particular paper you read in my other class. Body recomposition: can trained individuals build muscle and lose fat at the same time? Okay, so you're training somebody. What's probably about 95% of the time, what do they state as their goal?
Lose fat.
I want to build muscle and lose fat. That's what they say about 95% of the time. So that's the body recomposition effect. So you have an anabolic process and a catabolic process taking place at the same time. That's interesting. Has a lot to do with nutritional intake. We get into that in another class, but to make things easier to read, I want you to notice what they did here. summary of study designs that have demonstrated recomposition. Okay, so they defined recomposition, building muscle and losing fat, demonstrated recomposition with resistance training without nutrition reported in trained individuals. So these studies, they didn't report what they were doing for nutrition, which is important even though they demonstrated a recomposition effect. So the study, so the last name of the first author, training status, that's important. So were they well-trained? Were they untrained? Study design, okay. Training intervention, so what did they do? The assessment, in this case, BC is body composition assessment. Nutrition, again, it's stated not reported, and then the conclusions. So you could do the same thing for your lit review. It'd make it really easy to keep track of studies, because you, rather than fishing through a study to find a certain result, you just have this table where you could go and say, okay, this group found this. That makes it really easy to compare. So here's another table, summary of study designs that have demonstrated recomposition with resistance training and nutrition data provided. So these are the really good ones because nutritional intake was controlled for. So these are the ones you really want to pay attention to, where nutritional intake was reported. So same thing all the way down with the conclusions on the end here. Okay, so I'd encourage you to do likewise with your lit review, just to make things easier to keep track of. Okay, so here's another example of putting together a table with several studies. So looking at a problem statement, the effects of exercise on body fat. Same thing here, the effects of frequent and intense exercise on body fat, the effects of workload on body fat. So looking over here at the finding, can you identify any dose response effects? So exercise is somewhat like medicine in that you perform a certain dose over time and you get a certain response. So the dose-response relationship of exercise. So comparing it with taking medication, does everybody take the same amount of medication? Is everyone prescribed the same amount? No, there's lots of factors that go into it. So then extending that into exercise, is everyone prescribed the same amount of exercise? No, so there's a lot of factors that go into that. So exercise has a dose-response relationship. With exercise in particular, to get a response with a trained individual, the dose has to be higher or intense to get a certain response, because over time we have this diminishing returns as we progress and as we become more fit, progressing towards our genetic potential. So the dose has to be increasingly more intense with more volume to get to that next level. So looking at, maybe this is the bottom three, looking at, say, intensity. So I'm assuming this is 70% of GP. I'm not sure what that is here, but I'm assuming 70% is more intense than 50%. So at 70%, they lost 5% body fat. 50%, they lost 2% body fat. This study on frequency, 2 days, 4 days, 6 days. So what are you seeing here? 1% for the 2-day-a-week group, 4% for the 4-day-a-week, 5% for the 6-day-a-week. So can you start to see that dose response? More days would be a higher dose for a certain response. Is it linear though? So going from 2 to 4 to 6. So 4 days a week, you get 4%. So you add on another 2 days and you only get how much more? Another, going from 4% to 5%, you're adding another 1% loss. So it's not linear, it's more curvilinear. So maybe people want to consider, where am I going to get the greatest bang for my buck? Okay, so maybe someone doesn't have time to do something 6 days a week, but they get almost the same benefit with 4 days a week, maybe slightly less. Same thing here, different pedal speeds, RPM. So you can kind of see a dose response pattern here going from 30 to 45 to 60. Okay, so we're working through it. Thanks for hanging with me here. So inductive reasoning, you begin with observations. So what's an example of that? Well, the literature is showing that light load and high repetitions result in similar hypertrophy to doing heavy load and low repetitions. So 2 different types. How many have done both? Low weight, high reps to failure, heavy weight, low reps to failure, okay? So you begin with those observations and then you conduct experiments to test it. And it turns out for muscle hypertrophy, the literature says that's pretty much true. Deductive reasoning, okay, is you begin with a theory. Okay, so a theory, ground-based free weight exercises have the greatest transfer of training effect on sports performance. What does ground-based mean? Don't overthink it. Ground-based. Your feet connected to the ground. That's what a ground-based exercise is. Ground-based free weight exercises have the greatest transfer of training effect. What's transfer of training mean?
Correlates directly to something else.
Yeah, so an improvement in your ability to lift weight leads to an improvement in your ability to do something else related to your sport. That's transfer of training effect. So that's the reason you lift all those weights, right? Because the hope is that there will be a transfer. Otherwise, why do we do that? So the hope is the transfer will happen. And so with that theory, we go on to do different experiments to determine whether that's true. And research has found that indeed that is the case. Okay, so what if your topic is fished out? If you ever need a good laugh, just look up Bill Dance fishing videos. This is like, he does this stuff all the time. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or it seems like it's just by accident, but Bill Dance fishing videos, good laugh. Before giving up on a topic, try to find a unique or unexpected aspect of that topic. So what hasn't been done before? Maybe you could do what's been done before a little bit better. Okay, so working down towards the end here. Steps in the literature search. Write down a question. So everybody has given me their topic. So now I want you to write down a question, not something you have to turn in. So we found out with Megan, she's got to think about the dose of caffeine, what else is being consumed along with the caffeine potentially, how we're defining sleep habits, and so on. So the research question has to be really specific. Okay, use special words called Boolean operators. So when you type in search words at the library or into Google and so on, the most common words are and or. So the word and narrows the search. That's what you want to do, is narrow your search. So you want really good words that describe your topic, and you want to narrow it down so you're not coming back with 1,000 references that you have to go through. The word or broadens the search. The word or broadens the search. That's not necessarily what we want. Unless you're coming back with maybe 2 citations, then you'd want to rethink it and maybe go with or to increase the number of references. Okay, obtaining primary sources. Example journals in kinesiology. So your textbook has lots of them. So this is all the health and human performance related journals. Not all journals are equal. So journals are rated based on an impact factor. An impact factor kind of gives you an idea of how popular a journal is or how often articles are cited from that journal. So impact factor would be a really good way of knowing the validity of the information. Sports medicine is number 1. Number 1 journal in HHP. It's just called Sports Medicine. It has the highest, consistently the highest impact factor. So you know things in that journal are really good and undergo a lot of review before being published. Okay, summary table. So I showed you the summary table from the recomposition article. So things to include. These were things that were included as part of their summary table. I'm only suggesting that you make a summary table because I promise you it makes it a lot easier to organize studies. And after you've read 20 studies, you tend to forget which study had a certain result. So if you have a table, then it makes it easier to find. So ultimately, a faster way to do things. So how do we interpret literature? This is kind of funny, but true. So what was said in a study, this is where things get real. It has long been known that what was meant by the authors, I haven't looked up the original reference, but what was said, it is suggested that, I think, it is believed that, I think, typical results are shown, best results are shown. Three of the samples were chosen for detailed study. The results on the others didn't make sense. Okay, so you want to develop your outline first. Okay, so ACSM review that we talked about would be, think about headings and subheadings. Be very selective. Tyree will help you on Thursday with being selective. Structure of the literature review goes like this. So the section of your proposal that is the literature review will be 3 or 4 pages, so not excessively long, but you need to have a really narrow focus. So introduction, main body, summary, and conclusions. Sections of your literature review. References. One of my goals for this class for you is to help you become a better writer, keeping things simple and straightforward. So avoid jargon when writing. Jargon would be saying something like a considerable amount of, rather than say much, would be a better way to say that. Are of the same opinion. Agree. At the present time. Now. So just simplicity, fewer words to put your meaning across for the purpose of. Okay, just for. Okay, it may be that. Okay, I think. Large in size. Just large. Okay, needless to say. And just omit item. On the basis of. And by. So be very straightforward in writing. So to end class today, I want you to consider if you change your mind on your topic, here's some things that you could address instead. So is there ever a day when mattresses are not on sale? It's from your textbook. If people evolve from apes, why are there still apes? Why does someone believe you when you say there are 4 billion stars, but checks when you say the paint is wet? Why do you never hear father-in-law jokes? If swimming is so good for your figure, how do you explain whales? How do those dead bugs get into enclosed light fixtures? So why does Superman stop bullets with his chest but duck when you throw a revolver at him? And so why do people constantly return to the refrigerator with the hope that something new to eat is materialized? I do that every day. Why do banks charge a fee on insufficient funds when they know that there's not enough money in the account? Why doesn't Tarzan have a beard? Okay. All right, so where are we meeting on Thursday? Library 311. Okay, see you then. Yes, thank you. So the Saney's muscle growth papers. Thank you. You don't have it today, just email it later today. Email it later today. Thank you.
We should like just be getting maybe we could just
Yep, bye-bye.
So
Yep.
me and Shelby aren't gonna be in class Thursday.
Okay, you're excused.
Okay,
You got travel.
it's just like going over how to
Yes.
research.
She's over there all the time,
Okay.
so you could go talk to her. So that's what she's there for. I'm just filling an hour with our class, so.
Alright.